Good morning, everyone. And we are going to continue, surprise, surprise. So we are looking at the Mahanama Sutta, which is all about the 6 recollections, the Anusatis, and we're going to continue with that. And see what happens. I may go a little bit faster from now on, because we have only a couple of days left of this retreat. And so we may have to go a little bit faster, which is fine. We can kind of do things in different kinds of speeds. In many ways, the first part of these suttas are perhaps the most interesting ones and the most practical ones, because they deal directly with meditation practice. In fact, they're all very practical in some ways, but it's probably the most important one. So we can then come to the kind of supporting factors and do those a little bit more quickly. But for now, we will continue with the Anusatis. And yesterday, we were looking at the Buddha Anusati and how to recall the Buddha. And what is interesting, as I pointed out yesterday, is that the Buddha kind of gives us a template how to think about him, how to recall him. And this is what this famous iti piso formula is all about. It's all about how the Buddha recommends us to remember him as a teacher. And if you look at those qualities, and you will all know those qualities by heart, I'm sure, you will notice that how kind of ordinary, in a sense, they seem. Yeah, it's about all kind of things that are not supernatural. Yeah, it's not about flying through the air or reading the minds of others or anything like that. It's about understanding. Yeah, that's kind of the main aspect. Here is someone who really understands. And also it has the aspect of being a teacher. So it has the aspect, if you like, of compassion as well comes in there. So it is about the person who has developed the human potential to the maximum, the deepest kind of understanding, and then the compassion that arises from that. And that is what the Buddha, in a sense, is. And so these are the things we should focus on. Too often in the Buddhist world, we focus on what you might call the supernormal things. And I'm not saying that they don't exist. May very well exist, and I would say some of them definitely do exist. But that is not what the Buddha really is about. The Buddha is about insight, understanding of the world, and being the teacher of everyone. That is the significance of the Buddha. And as a teacher, the Buddha is very extraordinary. He is the Anuttara Puddhisadhamma Sarati, the unsurpassed teacher of Puddhisadhamma. Puddhisadhamma is like people, tameable people, if you like. Unsurpassed teacher. Why is he the unsurpassed teacher? What does this actually mean? And it comes back to this idea, what we saw yesterday, of someone who has really understood the human condition, understood what it means to be human. So there is the wisdom side of the Buddha, full comprehension of what is suffering and what is happiness, how to achieve that happiness, how to avoid the suffering, a full realization of this. And this is what makes the Buddha so extraordinary on the wisdom side. But of course, if you have a full comprehension of what it means to be a human being, and you see the suffering of the world, and this is what the Buddha does, this is why he teaches, then of course compassion arises, because he understands that he has a solution to the problem of everyone in the world. And so he teaches, and this is why the Buddha teaches. The Buddha doesn't teach because he decided 4 eons ago that he was going to become a Buddha, and he had compassion for all beings. The compassion arose once he had found the solution. That is when the compassion arose, and that is the right time for compassion to arise, because then there is grounds for the compassion. And so the Buddha has the solution to the problem. He has the deepest insight into what it means to be human. And then he decides to teach, even though it is against his own interest. The Buddha's interest is just to stay in a cave, meditate, close his eyes, enter deep stages of meditation, and kind of just, avoid the dukkha of the world. And instead, he kind of puts himself almost in harm's way. Maybe harm's way is a bit too strong, but he puts himself in a situation where he has to deal with a certain amount of suffering, of problems, of people not understanding him, of people getting angry with him, of people arguing with him, all of these kind of things. And so for the Buddha, it's actually a negative to go out and teach the world. And this is what makes the Buddha so different from almost any other teacher. All teachers in the world, they teach because they have some self-interest in teaching. They get a salary. They get maybe fame, because if the ego is involved, then the fame, of course, is always going to be attractive. Maybe you have many disciples, you get put on a pedestal, you become important, and all of these kind of things. There is a self-interest in teaching. Almost every teacher in the world is like that. And you can see sometimes how even the best people get corrupted because they become too famous and they're not ready for that fame. But the Buddha is different. The Buddha has the sense of self is gone. There is no self-interest in these things anymore. The Buddha has only one motivation for teaching, and that is compassion. Everything else is gone. And what that means when it comes to the teaching of the Buddha is that it is very pure. If there is self-interest, there's always going to be a bias in the mind. There's going to be a desire to please the people you are teaching. There's going to be a desire not always to tell the full truth, because if you tell the full truth, it might be too much or whatever. But for the Buddha, there is no bias. So you can be sure that what he tells you is going to be exactly the way it is. It is purely done out of compassion. And what that means is when you read the suttas, you read them in a different way. You don't read them as if you're reading an ordinary book. You don't read them as if you are reading something from an ordinary teacher. You read them knowing that everything said in the suttas is because of compassion, because they want to help you. They want to support you. They want to give you the opportunity to overcome suffering in your life and to find the highest happiness. That is what the Buddha is about. And when you understand that, you start to read these things in a different way, because you know here is kind of compassion almost radiating out of the page, if you like. And so you read it with much greater care. You try to understand. You understand the intention behind these things. And the words come alive in an entirely new way when you think about it in this way. Compassion and wisdom combined is this beautiful and very, very powerful motivating factor of the Buddha that drove his entire teaching career. So this is a way of thinking about this, and it is not just a way of thinking. Of course, it relates very much to what the Buddha is as a person, but it helps you to get involved with the teachings in a kind of more profound and deep way when you think about it in this way. So this is one aspect of the teaching of the Buddha and how he teaches us, and how then to engage with the teachings, reading carefully, reflecting on the message, knowing that it is in your best interest to reflect on this properly, not to be too quick to dismiss things if they seem strange, taking it on board very slowly. But there's another aspect of the Buddha as teacher, which I always found very interesting. And I'm always kind of repeating what I've said before, but there are some things that I think are really worthwhile repeating because they bring us closer to the Buddha as a teacher. And this is the idea that the Buddha is not just theoretically your teacher because you have access to the Dhamma, but you are actually almost like a direct disciple of the Buddha. Sometimes you may think that the Buddha, he taught the people who were in front of him. The 4 parisas were there, the bhikkhus, the bhikkhunis, the upasakas were all present, and the people who were there were the people he taught. But not really. That's not how the Buddha was thinking here. The Buddha sets in motion the wheel of the Dhamma chakra pavatana. And the idea of setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma is the idea that the Dhamma has a certain momentum, a certain power. Once it is set kind of going in the world, once the Dhamma is taught to one person, that person will understand, maybe realize those teachings. And then because they realize, they will kind of bring that Dhamma to the next generation. And then to the next generation. And it rolls on from generation to generation, from one society to another society, from one era to another era. Moving on, the Dhamma Chakkapavatana, the rolling on of the wheel of the Dhamma, according to the momentum that the Buddha gives this wheel when he starts out his teaching career. And the Buddha knew this from the very beginning. This is a gift to humanity. It is not just to the people in front of me. It is to anyone in the future, anyone in any society who actually gets to hear these teachings. This is what these teachings are about. And so when he taught these teachings, he didn't just see the assembly in front of him. He saw all the future generations, all the people, wherever they are in the world, who would benefit from these teachings. And of course, what that means is that when he articulates his teachings, he articulates the teachings in such a way that they have a universal appeal. They are not just an appeal to people in ancient India and their society, but they have a universal appeal to the things that are common among all human beings, which is what everything that is important is in common between human beings. Our psychology, all the things that make us human. And that is what he teaches. And so when you read the suttas, they don't really seem very alien. They seem quite natural. You watch the breath, you have anger and desires, you have delusions, you want to be happy, you want to overcome suffering. Everyone can understand these things. You don't really want to die, death is a problem, old age is not very nice. We know, everyone understands these things. It is just the human condition as such. And this distinguishes the teachings of the Buddha from almost all other religious teachings. If you open the Bible, for example, and it kind of seems like something out of the Middle East 2,500 years ago, or 3,000 years ago, whatever, sometimes very difficult to relate to. It's about the Israelis who traveled through the desert in Egypt, all these kind of stories and all these lineages. I have never really read the Bible very much. I occasionally open it up in one page and then I fell asleep very quickly, so I kind of gave up on that. Actually, I was never really interested because for me, Christianity never made any sense. I couldn't make any sense of Christianity, so I kind of just gave it up very quickly. And then you can read the ancient Hindu scriptures, the Upanishads or the Vedas. And when you read the Vedas and the Upanishads, it's like entering a different reality. It's like a realm, weird, strange reality. And this was kind of the culture at that time, the way the Brahmins would kind of carry forward the ancient religion of the Vedas. And that was very mystical and very strange and very, very difficult to understand. The suttas, by comparison, are quite easy to understand, even though they are incredibly profound, even though they talk about experiences that most people have never had. Still, you can kind of understand what is going on. And this is so it is easy access. It is coherent. It holds together. It is universal. It is a natural kind of teaching. And this is what kind of makes this the Buddha so powerful. So when the Buddha taught, he taught in this way for everyone in the future. And because he taught for everyone in the future, it means that when he gave these teachings, he was thinking of people like us. Everyone here today, you, me, everyone here, he was thinking of us. Because he was thinking of everybody who was interested in these teachings. And so in this way, the Buddha becomes your teacher almost directly. It's not, he was actually thinking about all of these, where every people are coming together, listening to the Dhamma. That was what was in his mind when he gave these teachings. And so when you read these teachings, remember, this is the Buddha speaking to you. He's not talking just to the ancient Indians, he's talking to you, he's talking to everyone. And when he's talking to you, and he has the deepest insight into what it means to be human, and he's coming out of compassion, then the words start to become much more powerful. So how we read the suttas, how we engage with them, how we think about the Buddha, about this person who stands behind these words. Yeah, this incredible spiritual genius, the greatest spiritual master in human history by far, compared to anyone else. Then you start to really get into what is going on. You read it in a new way. You read it with a sense of reverence, with it trying to understand, trying to kind of get into what this is all about. So you can see here, it is about how we relate to these things, how we relate to the Buddha. Yeah, matters enormously for our appreciation of these things. And we should be careful not to use the word of the Buddha too much for arguments. Yeah, you have the famous simile of the snake in the Alagadupama Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 22. And what the Buddha says, if you grasp the Dhamma in the wrong way, it's like grasping a snake by the tail. If you grasp a snake by the tail, it turns around and bites your hand, yeah, because you grasp the teachings in the wrong way. So we use them for spiritual purposes and for understanding, but we are careful not to get too mired into views and opinions that end up with all sorts of arguments. It's good to have discussions, very important to have discussions, but there should really be cool discussions aimed at understanding, and then they are the right kind of way of dealing with it. So this is the Buddha. And sometimes what I... actually, before I do that, let me just remind myself what actually is in in this particular thing. So you are the supreme guide of those who wish to be trained, the Anuttara Puddhisa Dhamma Sarati. You are Satta Deva Manusanang, teacher of gods and humans. Yeah, this is the beautiful thing about Buddhism, is that we are dealing with a human being. We're not dealing with a god. We're not dealing with something kind of slightly weird and mystical. We're dealing with reality. What is right in front of us. And whatever gods there may be, well, they have less wisdom than the Buddha. And so the Buddha becomes the teacher of everyone. Even though gods may kind of look very marvelous and amazing. Yeah, I don't know if you have ever seen a deva, but if these devas are kind of, the way they are described, luminous, powerful, very, very special in many ways. It's very easy to kind of start, revering or venerating a deva because they look so marvelous. But because they look marvelous doesn't mean they necessarily have any wisdom. Then awakened and blessed, yeah, this is Buddho Bhagava, the last part there, so awakened, basically just repeating what has been said already. And Bhagava, of course, is this ancient Indian word that was used for everyone who was a special teacher. They are often called the Bhagava, the blessed one or the fortunate one or something like that. So how can we strengthen this idea of being with the Buddha further? These are some of the ideas I have been talking about, just to kind of get a sense for the Buddha. So as I mentioned yesterday, when you read the suttas, read it with a sense of getting a feel for the Buddha, a feeling for who he was as a human being. And you start to get that feel when you see him in various situations. Sometimes it is useful to read the autobiographical suttas, where the Buddha talks about his own life. And there's a large number of suttas like that in the Majjhima Nikaya 4, the Bhayabhairava Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 19, the Dvedavitaka Sutta. They're all about the Buddha's life. The Arya Pariyesana Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 26, the Mahasyanada Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 12, the Mahasatchaka Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 36. We have seen now the Upakilesa Sutta is also about the Buddha talking about his past, Majjhima Nikaya 128. The Bodhiraja Kumara Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 85. And I'm sure I've forgotten a few, but this gives you an idea. There's quite a lot of these autobiographical suttas where you kind of get an understanding for the Buddha and you start to get a feel for who this person is. And sometimes I have found it useful to imagine myself in the presence of the Buddha. What does it mean to be in the presence of the Buddha? And sometimes I kind of think, way the Buddha is described in the suttas. He's described as sitting at the foot of a tree, gone for the day's abiding, the Diva Vihara. Yeah, after the meal they go into the forest and they kind of do meditation, maybe they rest for a while and they meditate. And you can imagine yourself kind of going into the forest. Someone has told you that the Buddha is in the forest. The Buddha is in the forest? Yes, the Buddha is in the forest. The Buddha is in the forest? Yes, the Buddha is in the forest. The Buddha is in the forest? Yes, the Buddha is in the forest. That actually happens in the sutta. That's why I say it this way. It's not just me being silly. This is actually from the, where is it now? I think it's in the Sanasana Khandaka. Maybe the Sanasana Khandaka. It's a story, or maybe it is in the Chivara Khandaka. I can't remember now. It's a story of Anathapindika. And no, it must be the Sanasana Khandaka because it gives a monastery. So the story of Anathapindika is a beautiful story about the meeting of the Buddha. And, we can think of ourselves in a similar kind of situation. And so Anathapindika, he was living in Savatthi, and his brother-in-law was living in Rajagaha. And then one day he had to go on business in Rajagaha, so he visits his brother-in-law. Yeah? And so he comes to his brother-in-law's house, and when he comes to the house, the brother-in-law ignores him. Yeah? He just has to sit down on a chair, and his brother-in-law is really busy. He's preparing things. He's kind of telling his servants, because all these people are really, really wealthy people, telling his servants to prepare this and do that and get things ready. And then after a long time, the evening kind of falls, and the brother-in-law comes up to Anathapindika and, says, and they have a chat, and Anathapindika says to him that, why are you running around so much? Usually when I come, you kind of greet me and say hello, but now you haven't got any time for me. What's going on? Are you having a meal for King Bimbisara together with the fourfold army? Is that what you're doing? What are you preparing? Is this some kind of super-duper wedding? What is going on? And his brother-in-law says, no, there's none of those things. What I'm doing, I'm preparing for the Buddha to arrive. And Anathapindika says, are you saying Buddha? Yes, I'm saying Buddha. Are you saying Buddha? Yes, I'm saying. Are you saying Buddha? Yes, I'm saying Buddha. And then he says, I want to see that Buddha. And the brother-in-law says, oh, now is not the right time. You have to wait till tomorrow morning. And then Anathapindika goes to sleep. And he can't sleep at night. He's so excited about seeing the Buddha, right? He wakes up all the time during the night. Now it must be time to go. And he falls asleep. Now it must be time to go. And then eventually he gets up and it's still dark. And then he kind of walks out of the city by himself. And he's afraid. You can imagine, and probably quite dangerous thing to do, right? So he gets really frightened. But then the pull of seeing the Buddha, this desire to see this extraordinary person is so strong, he overcomes all his fears. And eventually the light comes, the sun rises and the light comes. And then he comes to the Buddha. And then the Buddha, when he comes up to the Buddha, comes close, the Buddha is walking up and down. And the Buddha sees him. And he says, Sudatta, welcome. Sudatta is Anathapindika's name. And then the Anathapindika says something like, I hope you have slept well, or something like that, something very simple. And then the Buddha says a couple of verses. And Anathapindika is straight away, he's kind of converted. He's a Buddhist for life after meeting the Buddha like that. And it's a beautiful little story. Yeah, I don't know exactly if it happened like that. It's a story, it's a narrative part of the suttas. But it's beautiful. And sometimes it is, you can imagine yourself like Anathapindika. Yeah, you're going towards the Buddha. You're kind of excited and fearful at the same time. The Buddha has this extraordinary reputation as the greatest spiritual master ever arisen. You kind of heard this word Buddha. The word Buddha kind of comes through the kind of grapevine from the ancient past. There have been Buddhas in the past. You know kind of roughly what it means, but you don't really know what a person like that looks like. And so you are excited. You are fearful. You walk into the forest. And then you see the Buddha at the root of a tree here. And then when you see the Buddha at the root of a tree here, what is it that you see here? Well, what you see is basically a monk, right? A monk who probably wears the robe more the Sri Lankan style, not so much the Thai style. I think the Thai style is a bit dodgy, but that's kind of how I was taught to wear the robes. That's kind of the way I use it. I think the Sri Lankan style is more the traditional style, and maybe there was a little bit different because things change over time. But the Buddha looks like a monk, shaven head. But what is kind of special about the Buddha is not what he looks like, but it is the aura, it is the vibe, the juju, the feeling of being in the presence of something really special, a sense of peace, a sense of power, a sense of benevolence, a sense of kindness that is very rare to experience in the world. And so you are kind of absorbing these feelings a little bit. And as you absorb these feelings, because again they get close to the Buddha, you start to calm down. You become less fearful. You're starting to gain confidence that this is true. There really is something special going on here. And so then you approach the Buddha even more. And as you approach even more, the fear subsides. And then you go all the way up to the Buddha. And maybe you don't really know what to do. This is the Buddha after all. What is the right thing to do? So you kind of are a bit perplexed. And then the Buddha sees you and the Buddha says, sit down. And because of the way the Buddha speaks, because of the kindness, because of the feeling of peace about him, you just sit down naturally. And you start to feel really at ease. You start to understand that you are in the presence of something extraordinary. And then the Buddha says to you, I hope you are well. I hope you haven't come from afar like we have seen before. And you say, yes, I'm well. And the Buddha asks you, why have you come here? And then you have some very simple question. And maybe you feel a bit foolish because of your simple question. You say, oh, I had an argument with my husband or my wife. Or you are a monk and maybe, oh, I had some, I think I committed a dukkata offense. Is it really an offense? Is it in the commentaries or is it in the Vinaya? Which should I be concerned about it? And the Buddha had to answer these kind of things all the time. So this is not just hypothetical. And then the thing about the Buddha is that even though you think that your question is kind of silly and kind of maybe not worthy of the occasion, not worthy of the greatest spiritual master in history, the Buddha understands you, and that's the whole point. The Buddha is human. He knows what it is like to be human. He knows what it means to have doubts if you're a monastic. Is this rule important or not? What does it matter? Do I need to confess it if it is a dukkata, or should I just confess the patimokkha offenses? What do I need to do? And he will give you a simple answer. And if you are a layperson and you have a problem in your relationship, he understands that too. And then he gives you advice. And one of the beautiful things about the advice of the Buddha is that it is often very simple. It is nothing fancy. He will not tell you about dependent origination, at least not on your first visit. He may be after you have visited the Buddha 10 times, he might, and you ask specifically, he might talk about those things. But he gives you a simple thing, like have compassion. Understand that people in the world are conditioned, they are doing their best, but whatever, something like that. Actually, probably much more interesting than that, but something simple that you can understand. And then you listen to the words of the Buddha. And there's something about the words of someone who is very special like the Buddha, that it is not the meaning of the words that is important, but where they come from. And because you hear where they're coming from, because you hear the peace, because you hear the kindness, the compassion, the wisdom lying behind those words, you take those words in, even though they are very simple words. You take them in a deep way that you never take on board any other words. They become very powerful to you, very important to you. And so then, after hearing the words of the Buddha, you just want to bow down. And so you bow down to the Buddha, and you feel like in the very fact of bowing down, you are growing in spiritual qualities, because that is what it means to bow down in the right way. Because what are you bowing down to? You're bowing down to the respect you have for the spiritual qualities that are embodied by the Buddha. And so you bow down, and it feels like the most beautiful thing in the world. And maybe you have some tears in your eyes because you understand that you have discovered something extremely valuable, something you will take with you for the rest of your life. And as you leave that place, as you walk away from the Buddha, you feel that this has changed your life forever after. Those simple words, this simple interaction with this extraordinary spiritual person has done something to you. Yeah, you have met something extraordinary. And so you leave, you take the simple teachings with you. And because they came from the Buddha, you never forget them. It becomes a view that becomes implanted in your mind. Always have compassion. Always understand the suffering of others. Understand the conditioning of other beings. You take this with you, and you always remember it because it becomes a view implanted in your mind. And then, of course, taking it from there, you then carry on with his teachings because this meeting with the Buddha has such significance. So sometimes we can kind of use these kinds of imagination, reading the suttas, seeing what happens at that time 2,500 years ago. We can kind of put ourselves in the shoes or the lack of shoes or whatever it was, that those people were at that time, and put ourselves in a similar situation to try to understand what was going on. And the story of Anathapindika is kind of very touching in that sense. And that's how you kind of then build up the perception of being a disciple of the Buddha and how you make the Dhamma truly meaningful. So that is some ideas of Buddha Nusati. Now, the way to do these kind of reflections will vary enormously from person to person. What gels with you, what is meaningful to you will vary. You will look at these things in one way, someone else in another way. So you find your own way with this. These are just some ideas, some ways that I like to try to reflect on these things. And then when you make it your own, that is when it becomes very strong and very powerful. And then sometimes when you bow down to a Buddha statue, remember that the Buddha statue represents the qualities of the Buddha. So then when you remember that, sometimes you may feel the kind of joy and happiness of being a disciple of this extraordinary person called the Buddha. So that is some ideas. So now I will move on to the other anusatis, the Dhammanusati and etc., etc. Actually, not quite yet. First of all, I want to show you how this contemplation of the Buddha, how it affects the mind and the meditation when it is done in the right way here. Okay, so then when this recollection comes to an end, then the Buddha says, when a noble disciple recollects the Buddha, the realized one, their mind is not full of greed, hate and delusion. Or it is not full, if you like, of desire, ill will, and confusion. That's maybe, to my mind, a bit better, because greed, hate, and delusion is very strong words, and it's actually more kind of generally the defilements of the mind that die away. So desire, ill will, and confusion may be a better way of talking about this. And so the idea here is that because your mind is fixated on the Dhamma instead of worldly things, the worldly things die down, and then the Dhamma qualities come forth. Because what you are really reflecting on here are all the beautiful qualities of the Dhamma that a human being can possess. This is what you are doing here. And then, of course, the worldly qualities will die down because they are not compatible with those Dhamma qualities. When you know the quality of renunciation of kindness, then it's impossible to have hate and greed at the same time. That's really why this why they die away in this way. At that time, their mind is unswerving, based on the realized one. Unswerving is ujju. It means it's straight. The mind is not crooked. We talk about the defilements making the mind crooked. It's crooked in the sense that it doesn't understand things properly. It is biased. It becomes stupid when we are full of defilements. But when the mind is straight, that means that you're seeing things in the right way. The ujju kaditi, based on the realized one. A disciple whose mind is straight finds inspiration in the meaning and the teaching, finds joy connected with the teaching. Yeah, you find inspiration in the meaning and the teaching. The teaching is the Dhamma, the meaning is the Atta. And so you find inspiration in the teaching because you understand that these teachings, they come from this awakened mind, this profound mind. And you also understand what these teachings are pointing to. The Atta means meaning, but it also means the goal, yeah? Where we are going, because that's the meaning of the Dhamma, is the goal that we're heading towards. And so you start to understand the goal of these teachings. And the goal of these teachings is, well, it is, first of all, profound samadhi, the giving up of the world of suffering, and then eventually the profound insights and wisdom. And you get some feeling for what these things are. You get a feeling for what the qualities of mind that go with those insights, what they actually mean. So you kind of start to feel the goal of Buddhism, yeah, what actually it is. And then you get inspired because you understand the power of this, the teachings that lead to that goal, and then the goal itself. And then the joy arises, the pamoja arises when you think in this way, because you understand that you are in the presence of the greatest treasure in the world. And then this whole sequence that we talked about before, then it arises out of this. When they are joyful, rapture springs up, the piti comes, and when the piti comes, the body becomes tranquil, the passaddhi. And when the body is tranquil, they feel bliss, the sukha, and when they are blissful, the mind becomes stilled. You achieve samadhi. This is called a noble disciple who lives in balance among people who are unbalanced. Yeah, so you are in balance. You're kind of even. The desires and the ill will don't sort of buffet you and around all the time. You have an even kind of mind. You live untroubled among people who are troubled. Yeah, your suffering is starting to die down. You have access to something more important. You have a refuge. You have a place to move away from suffering. Many people in the world, they don't really have a proper refuge, and there's nowhere to go when life gets really tough. And this is what you have when you have the Dhamma. The deeper the Dhamma has been understood, the more of a refuge you have. And they have entered the stream of the teaching and developed the recollection of the Buddha. So you can see here how these recollections feed the meditation, how they support the meditation, how they make the meditation possible. And so here, in many ways, it looks like you are just doing Buddhanussati all the way to the Samadhi, but it should not necessarily look at it that way. Very often it will be a combination of things. You do Buddhanussati, but you also do things like maybe watching the breath. Yeah, things can be combined. Is it possible to do the Buddhanussati all the way to jhana? Yeah, probably. It says in this commentaries you cannot, but and the reason why the commentaries say that is because reflection has to stop before you enter the samadhi. But this is true with everything. It's also true with the breath. Yeah, you stay with the reflection until it gives rise to piti sukha. Maybe it gives rise even to a nimitta, and then you focus on the nimitta, and that takes you into the jhana. So, in that sense, you can use the anussatis all the way to the jhana stages, possibly. But very often, it will be a combination of things that bring it about. Anapanasati together with Buddhanussati, for example. Okay, so let us go on to the Dhammanussati. I'm going to do these things much more briefly. The Buddha was really the main thing, and these next things, they really come out of the Buddhanussati. The Dhamma exists because of the Buddha. So if you understand the Buddha, well, you also understand the Dhamma. And then the Sangha, the Aryan Sangha, emerges out of the Dhamma again. Yeah, it only exists because of the Dhamma. So the Buddha is really the main the kind of the spring from which everything else comes and emerges. But let's have a quick look at each of them. Furthermore, a noble disciple recollects the teaching, the Dhamma. The Dhamma is well explained by the Buddha, apparent in the present life, immediately effective, inviting inspection, relevant, so that sensible people can know it for themselves. When a noble disciple recollects the Dhamma, their mind is not full of desire, ill will, and confusion. And then because of all this, that noble disciple lives in balance. They live untroubled. They've entered the stream of the teaching, etc. So once you understand the Buddha, well, then you understand why the Dhamma is so powerful. These are the teachings that come from that awakened mind. And when you hear those teachings, in a sense, you are hearing, you are coming as close as you can to that awakened mind without getting there yourself through your own attainments. And it starts off by the idea that teaching is well explained by the Buddha, svakato bhagavata dhammo. And this is already, I think, an important statement in its own right, because when the Buddha says it is svakato, it means that he has put a lot of thought into how he expresses these teachings. You see sometimes in the suttas the Buddha goes on retreat, and you wonder, why does the Buddha go on retreat? He's already finished. What does he need to go on retreat for? After the Buddha's awakening, according to the suttas in the Udana, he was kind of sitting under each of the trees for 7 days. What is he doing under those trees? Well, it says in the sutta, it says he was just experiencing the bliss of awakening. Vimutti sukhang or something like that he is experiencing at that time. But I think that what he probably also did at that time was contemplating what he had realized. What is this thing that I have realized? How can I express this to other people? Imagine that you have this profound insight. It's like a flash, an insight into the nature of reality. It doesn't come with words. It is completely without words, right? So how can you express this to ordinary people who have no idea what you're talking about? It would have been pretty difficult to come up with a formula for explaining these things. And yet that is exactly what the Buddha does. It comes up with very precise language for how to explain his insight. And I say that, or I would guess that it would have taken him some time of reflection. And that is what may have happened in those first weeks after his awakening. And so it's svakato. It is carefully thought out. In the Pasadika Sutta, in the Digha Nikaya 29, the Buddha says that this teaching I have, there is nothing missing and nothing superfluous. And that is to me, a very important statement. There is nothing missing. What that means is that we don't actually need any further teachings. We don't need the Abhidhamma to kind of express what those teachings are. If we are going to read the Abhidhamma, maybe there are things in the Abhidhamma that are interesting, but we should always give the sutta precedence and then understand the Abhidhamma in terms of the suttas. And if the Abhidhamma adds too much, well, then we should be skeptical and careful. The suttas are complete. There is nothing missing in the suttas, says the Buddha. Nor is there anything superfluous. There's nothing that can be discarded. You can't just chuck out Samma Samadhi and think that you will be okay. There is a reason why the Buddha taught these things. You can't chuck out right view and say rebirth is just an ancient cultural artifact that we don't like. You can't do that, because if you do that, you no longer have the teachings of the Buddha. Something will be missing. There's a hole in those teachings. So svakato is important. It means, again, that when you read these teachings, every word can matter. Of course, we need to be a little bit careful, because sometimes over 2,500 years, sometimes there have been maybe minor changes. Nothing substantial, I think, but some minor changes. And so sometimes we need to keep that in mind as well. But generally speaking, every word matters. Apparent in the present life, so sanditiko, this is similar to ditta dhamma. You can see the seed in the present life. In other words, you don't have to wait till after you die. Most religions you only found out if you were right after you're dead. Which is kind of a bit dodgy in my opinion. Not sure if I would want to go with those religions. But the fact that it is apparent here and now is great. If you do an act of kindness now, you experience the result straight away. If you are able to watch your breath, you experience the samadhi now and the insight straight away. Immediately effective, same kind of thing. These teachings work straight away if you start to apply them. Inviting immediate effective, by the way, is akaliko. Inviting expectation, ehipasiko. Come and see for yourself. You will find it out. Relevant, opanaiko. Not sure why he translates that relevant. It means that it can be applied. The teaching is applied and then it bears results when you apply it. So applicable is one of the translations by Bhikkhu Bodhi. It's a little bit of a tricky word, opanaiko, so that's why translations are so different. But it leads you onwards. Na is from uppa plus nayati. And nayati is to lead. You have to go like a nayaka. You have the mahanayakas in the various nikayas in Sri Lanka that are like the leaders. It leads you kind of on or something like that. So that sensible people can know it for themselves. And the idea here is that if you are a wise person, he here has the idea of sensible. The Pali word is vinyu. I think sensible is kind of a little bit weak, to be honest. Sensible just means that you don't drink too much in the evening. That's kind of sensible, so you don't get drunk or whatever. Sensibility is not very profound. But here it is more about having a deep appreciation of spiritual teachings. Knowing these teachings for yourself means becoming an Arya. It's not the average sensible person, is not really an Arya. So it's a little bit kind of a little bit weak. But then again, translation is very, very hard. So I don't really mean to criticize the translator too much. It's impossible to get, there's no such thing as a perfect translation, unfortunately. So anyone can know this for themselves. So, are you Vinyu? Well, I would say everyone here is to some degree Vinyu, otherwise you wouldn't be here. Otherwise you wouldn't come to these kind of things. So there is a degree of wisdom is already there. So I think it's fair to say everyone here has that capacity to see these teachings for themselves. If you have killed your mother and father, you haven't got a chance, but otherwise you probably have a chance, especially if you are already enjoying the teachings of the Buddha. And then, as you then remember these teachings, but especially that the fact that they come from the Buddha, so when you read them, you are reading almost like reading the mind of the Buddha in a sense, when you read these teachings. It can become very powerful. And then, by remembering this, the same process happen again, and you live in balance, you live untroubled. So let's have a quick look at the Sanghanusati. Furthermore, a noble disciple recollects the Sangha. The Sangha of the Buddha's disciples is practicing the way that is good, direct, systematic, and proper. It consists of the 4 pairs, the 8 individuals. This is the Sangha of the Buddha's disciples that is worthy of offerings, dedicated to the gods, worthy of hospitality, worthy of religious donation, worthy of greetings with joint palms, Anjali Karaniya, and is the supreme field of merit for the world. When a noble disciple recollects the Sangha, you have the same situation again. It is free of desire, ill will, and confusion, and then you live in balance, you live untroubled, and you have entered the stream of the teachings. So the Sangha here are the Arya Pugala, the noble people, the people who have seen the Dhamma, who understand the Dhamma, who have practiced it properly. And so who is this Sangha? Who are these Aryas? How do we know who they are? And of course the truth is you can never actually know who they are. All you can do is you can have some idea who is worthy of respect, who is worthy of support, and these kind of things. And that's some idea you just get by observing. And this is what the Buddha recommends in the suttas. You observe people. And if someone has the qualities that align with the Dhamma, and you have some rough idea what that is, a lack of greed, lack of anger, lack of confusion, metta, karuna, peace, generosity, all of these kind of things, then you can have some idea where, what and who is worthy of respect. And also that the teaching should align with the word of the Buddha. It shouldn't contradict the word of the Buddha, right? There's another kind of important point, I suppose. And that gives you an idea, but you can never actually know who they are. You can have some idea, but not really know. And so for that reason, the idea of the respect for the no Aryan Sangha, it is a little bit abstract. It is not fully concrete. You may choose certain individual that you feel represents the Sangha in a good way, and so you place some degree of confidence in those people. But in the end, it is about the abstract idea of the Sangha. The Sangha as emerging from the Dhamma. As long as the Dhamma exists in the world, there will also be Aryas, because the Arya Pugalas are a result of the existence of the Dhamma. And so you place confidence in the individuals, but your main confidence is in the kind of idea that the Sangha must still exist. So if one individual lets you down, and I can guarantee you that's very often that people get let down because people don't live up to the standards. And also the problem of projection. We tend to project onto people. We project all kind of attainments onto individuals that haven't got them. Someone could be an excellent Dhamma speaker, and yet they may not actually have the real qualities underneath. Someone may look the part, but actually they may not have the qualities underneath. In the suttas, they talk about the person who is like the jar with a lid on it. Jar on the lid. It looks like they are dressed properly. They look kind of got their act really together. They look restrained. All of those kind of things. But the jar is actually empty inside, even though it is closed on the top. But then there is a jar that is closed and is full inside. Person looks the part, and they also have the qualities. So it's difficult to know sometimes, and we have to have a lot of wisdom to be actually able to find out. So place confidence, but be aware of also of the dangers in these things. So this is the Aryan Sangha. It's a little bit abstract, and sometimes it comes out through individuals. And these disciples, they are practicing the way that is good, supatipanno. The good way means that it leads to a good result. It is direct, ujju patipanno. Ujju, it is straight. It doesn't have any detours. If you want the shortcut, the Noble Eightfold Path is the shortcut. The Sevenfold Path is the long cut. It actually never gets you to the goal, so it's a very long detour. So make sure you kind of practice the shortcut. That's the Noble Eightfold Path. That's the shortcut to awakening. The shortcut to awakening is not to kind of crazy wisdom, anything like that. It is kind of the suttas are the shortest path to awakening. They practice systematically, it says here. Systematic is nyaya patipanno. And the nyaya in Buddhism is like the system of the Dhamma. It's like dependent origination and these kind of things. You practice according to dependent cessation or dependent origination in reverse, or whatever you want to call it. So you are reversing, you are undoing samsara by undoing avidya, which is the root of the problem. And the whole thing unravels systematically in that way. You practice proper, the way that is proper, samichi patipanno, proper, appropriate, etc., is the meaning of that word, is the right, proper way of doing things. In other words, back to the Noble Eightfold Path again. Different ways of really talking about the same thing, consisting of 4 pairs, and the 8 individuals, the 8 kinds of Aryas in the world. In the commentaries, they're called those who have attained the pala, the fruit, and those who are on the magga, the path. So the 8 individuals. And those individuals then don't last one mind moment and then the next individual comes, because if they'd only last one mind moment, I wouldn't call them an individual. I would call them a mind moment. And mind moments do not deserve to be called individuals. I would think all of these are actually people who last for a certain amount of time, the 8 individuals. And then comes the interesting part here, or what is also interesting. They are worthy of offerings. They are worthy of dedicated to the gods. And so this is the ahuneo, right? Trying to get this straight in my mind now. Ahuneo, Pahuneo, Dakineo, Anjali, Kadaneo. So the Ahuneo is like, I think one of the things about Bhante Sujato, he likes always to compare the suttas with the ancient Brahmanical scriptures like the Upanishads. And so he kind of sometimes brings in those understandings into the translation of the suttas. And perhaps to you, maybe that sounds strange. Why would you bring that understanding in? But actually, it is not strange at all, because remember, this is a Brahmanical society that they are in. So when the Buddha used certain words, it would have a certain meaning to those people at the time that related to the Brahmanical society. So that meaning would also then come out when the Buddha used these particular words. So if ahuneo is a standard donation to the gods, well, they would actually hear it as a donation, worthy of the gods, but now worthy of the Aryans instead. So these are the people worthy of all of these things, hospitality, generosity, of reverential or respectful greetings, the supreme field of merit for the world. And why is this the case? Well, it is the case because these are the people who know the teachings. And because they know the teachings, they bestow the greatest gift upon the world. The greatest gift that anyone can give you is the highest happiness. An ordinary teacher in school may be worthy of respect, but what they can give you? Only a tiny amount of happiness. Teaching you a profession, teaching you something that you can use in your life. But the Buddha and his Aryan disciples, they give you direct access to the highest happiness in the world. What a wonderful thing that is. It is like the recollection of the Buddha we did before. It's a similar kind of thing, but at a lower level, if you like. And because they give you that, well, then you support people in return. That's kind of the idea here. And they are the supreme field of merit. And this is why generosity is such a beautiful thing, because it always benefits both the giver and the receiver at the same time. This is kind of what this is about. So then, when you recollect the Sangha in this way, then again you find the balance, you find untroubledness, you find the stream, enter the stream of the teaching in the world. So this is how to think about the Sangha. It's a little bit abstract, but of course sometimes we also find individuals who we find inspiring, and it is useful to observe such individuals and feel what they feel like. And I have always had a very kind of close relationship with Ajahn Brahm, and I've always found him to be an extraordinarily inspiring person. I've lived with him for 30 years, and my respect really has only been growing for those 30 years as I see him the way he is. He has this kind of extraordinary solidity about him. There's never deviating, always kind of going in one direction, never really going away from that. There's no sense of Ajahn Brahm that he is affected by gain and honor and these kind of things, even though he may give teachings to thousands of people. In the monastery, he's like an ordinary monk. He sits there, sits there, looks a little bit goofish, tells a stupid joke, and kind of, you think, who is this person? If you don't look carefully, there's no feeling necessarily that this is someone extraordinary. You have to really notice the feeling about the person. Listen to the way they speak, when they give a Dhamma talk and these kind of things. Then you understand what it is about. And then you understand that even the goofishness, even the silly jokes, they too have a purpose. Yeah, they have a purpose of creating a light atmosphere, creating a good place where people can relax and be at ease. Then everything kind of comes together in a nice way when you start to understand things properly. Yeah. So I usually talk about Ajahn Brahm because he is the one I know the best, so it's kind of obvious why I talk about him. But of course there are people like this in the world, yeah, areas. And when you see them, it is, and when you are lucky enough to kind of find such people, not easy to find, but when you find them, then use that as a recollection in your life. And then you get into this idea of Sangha Nusati. So again, that is all for now. So please keep on having a good time. Have a nice lunch. And we'll see you back again at 4 o'clock this afternoon.